and welcome to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. My name is Meena Joshi, and before we bring out our guests, I wanted to remind everyone about our Breakthrough Alliance. So the application deadline has been extended, so all of the registration information for that is in the chat. And with that, we'd like to bring on our guest, Sneha Murali, who is the Senior IoT Business Development Manager at Qualcomm. For those of you in the know, we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for Sneha during the conversation, please pop them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and I will make sure that we get to it. And so with that, we'd like to bring on Sneha. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey Nina, nice to be here. I'm super excited to be a part of your Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. We are as well. And maybe to kind of kick things off, would love if you could kind of tell us your perspective on, what does women's health or what does healthcare innovation mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Nina. And I think for me, healthcare innovation is, basically three things. One is, I think the key problem is accessibility, to be able to find a healthcare vendor, to be able to find a physician. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that a person in a patient journey has to go through the first. So accessibility. And then secondly, it would be having a more patient-centric approach, because today a lot of the protocols and are orchestrated by a bunch of physicians and external factors. But making it truly patient-centric, putting healthcare in the hands of the patient becomes very key. And we're seeing a lot of it with telehealth and the boom of telehealth through 2020. And finally, I think it's quality of care, which again, I think with the intervention of technology, and I think everything about Qualcomm that I will be talking in the next few minutes, where you're trying to negate the things like misdiagnosis, improving the accuracy of the quality, and things like surgery, having there's a lot that we could do with AI and technology in general. So I think finally, it would be quality of care in the innovation chain.
Absolutely. And I love that you kind of talked about it both from just quality of the actual work that's being done, but also really having that patient-centric lens as well. I think a lot of those things can really provide a lot of great outcomes and make it very accessible and affordable, and everything that we are looking for in something as important as healthcare. And so on that note, would love if you could just tell us more about yourself, your background, and really, the journey that has led you to Qualcomm.
Absolutely, Nina. So basically, I'm an engineer by heart. So I started, as an electrical engineer. I did a little bit of coding, behind the blocks in software. And then I decided that, I'm an entrepreneur by heart. So I wanted to come out there, was good with business and people. So that took me to ASU to get my master's in management with a focus of strategic management. And then I had this unique skill set of, engineering and business. And so right after ASU, I was in the space of IoT, the Internet of Things, as it's called. Of course, it's a loosely termed term today, but it's basically things with semiconductors and technology, connectivity, compute, all of that. So it's been almost 9 years in the space, and Qualcomm happened about 2.5 years ago, where I was brought into the IoT team and was looking at connected healthcare / telemedicine. And it's been a great journey, because healthcare happened just 3 years ago, and I think there was a huge shift the last 3 years with COVID and stuff like that. So there was a huge boom, and I have actually seen through all of those transitions. So it's been a very, very interesting and a satisfying journey in the space.
Absolutely. And I think I would love to even just pick your brain, I think, about IoT, like Internet of Things, because I think, that's so, especially now, it's just so interesting, especially to see, what a connected life could look like. So I think it's really interesting to have that kind of be the lens in which you are kind of tackling healthcare issues. And kind of on that note, I would say, at least my perception of Qualcomm has always just been semiconductors, wireless services, things like that. would love if you could, shed some light on the work that Qualcomm is doing to disrupt and innovate and make an impact in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, I think to start with, I think I'll have to kind of break the bubble of just Qualcomm, as a company and as a brand. And we're doing when people think of Qualcomm, we do think of mobile and Snapdragon and all of that. Of course, that's the core of our business, but we're doing a lot beyond that in emerging markets. For instance, we have an automotive segment where we're doing, cars, car to cloud stuff, and then you've got wearables, music and audio, you've got IoT, you've got AR, VR, compute. So there's a ton that goes beyond mobile that I think a lot of people need to kind of turn heads to, and a lot of people are getting aware. So that's one of the first bubbles that I'd like to talk about Qualcomm. And in healthcare specifically, the way that we're strategizing this is we're looking at the whole continuum of care. So, like I said earlier, through the pandemic, telemedicine became the buzzword, right? Everybody were talking about remote patient monitoring, and so those remote patient monitoring hubs or devices that go into patients' homes that continuously monitor, intermittently at regular intervals, where people's patient data were transferred to through EMRs to the physicians and stuff, really helped save and protect and safeguard a lot of these critical patients' health. So that's one of the things where we really saw connectivity to be one of the core, value adds in healthcare. So that was kind of the start, just scratching the surface. And then comes a lot of other things like in the hospital, critical care, things like immersive training in AR, VR. And today, I think the biggest problem in healthcare is the shortage of physicians. I think there are about 1.2 doctors for every 1,000 patients, which is a huge void. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I always try to address, and it's a huge thing. So we need a lot more physicians, and this can happen through training. And I really believe our AR, VR technology, where you're enabling doctors, nurses, interns, staff, just to kind of more aptly, visualize whether it's procedures or learning by doing practices. So you're enhancing education, and this kind of, helps bridges the gap and also produces quality doctors and physicians. So that's the other area. And of course, we've got other things in IoT, like, asset tracking, where, hospitals want to track their devices, their wheelchairs, their infusion pumps and stuff like that to optimize efficiency. And then there's wearables, you're tracking physicians, you're tracking patients to again kind of reduce things like wait times and improve your one-on-one times with the actual physician patient interaction. So there's a ton that we're kind of taking a very pragmatic approach, where we're looking at inpatient at home and inpatient in the hospital. So we're trying to cut across the continuum of care with Qualcomm technology.
That is so incredible. And I love that you are, exactly to your point, kind of thinking about really from the home into the hospital, what all that looks like end to end. And you're kind of thinking of, it seems like, you're really thinking about a lot of these issues as a systems approach rather than just a one-point solution. So I think that is absolutely incredible. Wanted to first, I mean, there was so much really cool things that you all are up to. Wanted to first talk a little bit about, the remote patient monitoring and the wearables. Would love to learn a little bit more about, the types of use cases that you're kind of looking into, or kind of what that looks like, especially kind of given some of the, technology or wireless disparities in certain communities where sometimes that's not as strong as others. So would love to kind of get your take on what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think remote patient monitoring, very succinctly, if I have to define it, it's basically a fully integrated telehealth platform that could have data monitoring powered by AI. And I think one of the key things in the remote patient monitoring, like you rightly said, is connectivity, right? So it's it could be a combination of Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cellular. And cellular is needed when you need the patient data to be almost transferred instantaneously. So this comes into picture when you're dealing with critical patients with underlying conditions that we did see during COVID, right? People with, hearts and the baby boomer generation that couldn't necessarily step out of their houses.
Right.
So few of the initiatives that Qualcomm took, and there are a few devices out there in the market that is powered by Qualcomm that did really well, the shelves of Best Buy, and that catered to a lot of the telehealth issues. But particularly, I think the two things that I would like to point out is hospitals are rolling out these, excuse me, telehealth programs at a fast pace where they're
Right.
making sure places like Wisconsin, the Midwest, where there is no connectivity, cellular connectivity even, they're looking at satellite communication where they can use power the communication protocols through satellite. So there's a lot of there's a lot of keen eyes and investment in this space where eventually I think I would see a lot of hospitals rolling out remote patient monitoring for two things. One is, of course, to make sure there's this connectivity, there's an always connected protocol between patients and physicians, especially the critical ones. And the second thing is affordability. I think telehealth has become really affordable to the initial point that you were saying, where there are a lot of reimbursements that have come out, and it's a lot cheaper even for the hospitals to kind of reduce their resources and time in hospital versus at home. So I think a culmination of all of these points make remote patient monitoring a very viable option,
Absolutely.
both from the patient standpoint as well as the physician and hospital.
Absolutely. And I think, just with what the technology capabilities are right now, I think it really is an amazing accessibility and affordability, advantage to be able to have these types of tools, especially when, it's like you had mentioned, it's been vetted, there's a quality and accuracy kind of threshold that has been passed. And so on that front, you had mentioned a little bit earlier, kind of, the relationship between, I would imagine, you and the hospitals that you kind of partner with. Would love if you could share a little bit more about, what does that collaboration look like? How do you collaborate with other health systems to kind of, I would imagine, beyond just remote patient monitoring, but just to bring all of these ideas to life in a way that is sustainable?
Yeah, I think again that's a very interesting question because it's so hot, new, and happening for us, as we talk. So the thing with hospitals is that it's very important to understand that different hospitals are at different innovation curves, right? Some of them are highly innovative, some of them are laggards. So it becomes important to actually sit down with perhaps a CIO or a CMO and discuss problems. And one of the most interesting projects that I'm actually currently working on is, with a hospital neighborhood where when we discuss problems, we actually came down to 4 use cases that needed to be deployed. So we're doing kind of like a POC project where we were like, all right, what's your first, problem that could perhaps impact quality of care and your bottom line, right? Both of them. So we came down with 4 problems, and one of it was maximizing your hospital operations by having pop-up tents. So you might have seen that during COVID, where you had to get shots or do like quick blood work and stuff like that through drive-throughs. So and that happens outside, perhaps a parking lot of a hospital. So you need pop-up tents and you need connectivity. So that's kind of where private networks come into play, where you have a dedicated managed local network, which is secure, so the sensitive data stays on the premise, and it's optimized from a performance standpoint and with low latency. So it really worked out where you had a 5G private network for pop-up tents. And second use case was a purse button sort of a thing, where safety for physicians, right? So think about, critical patients, that probably volatile patients that are sort of mentally unstable could potentially be a threat to physicians.
Right.
So at an instance like that, it becomes really important for hospitals to safeguard their resources. So things like a wearable where you have a one voice technology where you're actually able to talk to your wearable, say, hey, and trigger an alarm, right? So you have exactly, combat system that comes and, safeguards and protects your physician. So that was the other interesting use case that
Wow.
we saw. And third is, I think everybody is into digital twins and a command center where, from
Mm,
an operation standpoint, you need to know exactly where your physicians are and where your assets are. So
mhm,
asset tracking is perhaps one of the biggest things that we're seeing across different hospitals, where they're adopting it at a more faster pace, where you have these sensors that are slapped onto assets that you want to track. Typically, it
mhm,
could be wheelchair, could be infusion pumps, could be anything that requires utilization, to 100%. Because a lot of these devices could be sitting in a storage room when it could be utilized. So they want to make sure they optimize, their assets and make sure that the utilization is 100%. So that's, I think, the other use case that we're seeing that's more predominant.
mhm.
And finally, I think immersive training, like I went back to my AR/VR point, where you're enabling doctors and nurses by helping them train through different procedures by and learning by doing practices
Right.
through AR VR. So that's a little more sort of higher up in the innovation curve, where slowly doctors are coming in and influencing that technology in hospitals. So
Wow. Number one, I am blown away by all of the really amazing initiatives that you're kind of taking a part of. And I think when we think about technology, I think it's easy to kind of really only view it in the lens of care delivery. But when you're talking about things like asset management and some of those other components that are really at the heart of operations to make things more streamlined, I think that is such a great call out, because I think it is like, in my mind at least, like a bit of a second priority because it's always just care delivery. But I think the fact that you're really kind of thinking about the hospital as a full ecosystem and how can you manage and optimize various parts of it so that it all runs smoother, I think is really incredible.
thank you,
Uh,
Neighbor. Thank you.
yeah. And quick question for you, just because, of course, since IoT, all of the work that you're doing, and you had mentioned a little bit earlier about surgery and robotics, would love to learn. I think that just sounds so fascinating. Would love to learn kind of, what the impact is, what are some of the projects or some of the initiatives or problems to solve that you think the marriage between surgery and robotics would be very fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. It's very important to understand when you talk about surgeries or robotic surgeries. I think it's important that there's a huge OR problem, operating room problem statement, which actually goes like this, right? So 10% of the 3 trillion, so $3 trillion every year, it goes as a waste, right? And 10% of the 3 trillion comes from surgery rooms or the ORs, right?
Mm,
And 60% of the hospital revenue comes from the OR, right? So it becomes a very important space to kind of tackle, from a critical standpoint, from a technology standpoint. And how can we now help save costs? How can we now help, generate revenues, cut costs, and make sure you're fully optimized? So that's where, Qualcomm sort of collaborated with some of leading edge, surgical companies, which basically targeted two things, right? One is you're making sure that you're augmenting a surgeon's visual view.
mhm,
Again, that's by our SOCs. One of our SOCs, which is Kona Heterogeneous Compute Capability, where you're able to sort of democratize surgical care in a way where you're extending insights from experienced surgeons
mhm.
across, regardless of your location. So you're visually mapping the surgical field. So you're able to see a patient's tissues, your blood flow, your
Wow.
perfusions at a glass to glass latency as low as 150 millisecond. Again, that's a combination of our compute, our heterogeneous compute, and our 5G. So
Mhm.
we've got a reference board. We've developed the whole reference board in association with another surgical company. So this requires a bunch of partnerships, and it's not trivial.
Mhm.
So we need the support of med device companies that are solving critical problems. It could be in bariatric, surgery, or whatever the class of the surgery. They could be solving problems, but it becomes important that they require these continuous training models, and also real-time deployment on the edge, which kind of reduces latency. So that's kind of where Qualcomm comes in from an edge, advantage. So that's one of the things that we're really excited working on.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And I think the implications, both from access and quality, I mean, are so vast with a tool like this.
Absolutely.
You are, I have a wealth of questions. You are really on the forefront of a lot of really interesting emerging technology. Would just love to kind of hear from you, what excites you? Are there any particular technology solutions or applications that are, really interesting in your eyes, or think that, there's a lot of really interesting applications? Would just, love to get your perspective as someone that's, seen so much of it.
Yeah, I think there's several, Nina, and I think the point in healthcare is, the fact that it is so diverse and there are so many people that are involved in the value chain makes it extremely complex, and it's a tough problem. But
Right.
to be honest, I think to catalyze the future of healthcare, to actually really, realize the potential of healthcare, it becomes important to form the right partnerships.
Mm,
And partnerships would be key, whether it is, in the device play, whether it's in the sensor tech play, whether it's EMR, EHRs, whether it's pharma guys like Kaiser. I think there's a ton of consortiums that needs to happen that makes a very healthy ecosystem. So, I'll give you an example. So, it's not really going to matter all the great technology that Qualcomm's coming out with, improving processing speeds and compute capabilities and connectivity, 5G, 6G, 7G. If a medical device player doesn't adopt it, if a doctor is not even open to the idea of embracing new technology, if then the CIO of a hospital doesn't incorporate it and brings it a part of the protocol in their hospital. So, I mean, there are a lot of interdependencies, which makes it a lot sort of slower than other industries. But again, I think that's a good problem, and it's a very challenging space for us to be in, to make sure that we all come together and make sure this happens again for the patients. And this is something that's super dear to my heart. And I think one of the things that you asked, in terms of technology, what do you think, would be the most disruptive thing? I think the more and more going towards patient centric, where you're analyzing insights and analytics and trends of understanding the patient's behavior and catering a more personalized medicine for the patient, versus coming from a very traditional approach of you need to do X, Y, and Z to go get what you need. So it's understanding and making sure personalized medicine would be something that's all of us are working towards, where we give the patient and make sure that the patient takes the decision on their health journey. So that's something that I think truly is going to be healthcare of tomorrow.
I absolutely love that. And I love that, you really brought up how collaboration and, all of that is so key in a space like this, where we all, we're all, I think, fighting for a very similar cause. So to be able to come together and build and continue to create an amazing next phase of healthcare, I think is such a good mission and rallying cry. So I love that you had mentioned that. I know that we're kind of nearing the end of our time together, but before we end, would love, I think it's my favorite question to ask every one of our guests, but if you had a piece of advice that you would like to share with us, whether it's something that maybe an old mentor has told you or something that you've just learned, if you could give us one piece of career advice, words of wisdom, what would that be?
Okay, that's a tough one, honestly. But um, I think as women, and I think this is a women tech a podcast. So I think we kind of need to empower people with with the right skill sets. And I think it doesn't matter whether you have the skill sets, to be honest, especially in product business. I feel like you need to be passionate enough to solve a problem. So
Mhm.
if a problem sort of leans into you and talks to you and says something to you, and if you're drawn in, you'll find ways to solve it. And drawing something out of my personal experience, where a lot of people said, hey, Sneha, you sure you want to do healthcare? I mean, it's really tough. Why don't you do something that's easier, in terms of revenue? And I was persistent enough to the point where I was like, hey, no, you know what? This is where I actually see there's a
Mhm.
ton of value. It could take time. And so I think one of the things that I would sort of, if I have to say, the key is to have patience. And it's not easy for someone that has, a high drive,
Mhm.
like women like you and I. It's not easy, but stick to it, and stay patient, stay passionate, and you will see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's how we're working with hospitals today, right?
Right, right.
It's not been an easy journey, but I think patience, persistence, and drive is what I would want to share.
I
For what?
love that. That is absolutely incredible. And I think that's a great way to end. Just really, really wanted to just give you all of my thanks for an amazing conversation. I think you are just a huge wealth of knowledge. So I really appreciate you taking the time to just share all of your experiences and what you're up to. I think it's very, very exciting. So thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much
much,
for that.
Nina. You've been a great host, and it's
Thank
been a
you.
great 30 minutes talking to you. I enjoyed it so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thanks, Neha. And then just wanted to let everyone know here that our applications are extended. So please be sure to check all of that out. The information is in the chat. And we also have our symposium coming up tomorrow. So please be sure to check that out. It's going to be a really amazing event. And of course, registration information in the chat. Wanted to thank our sponsors, Goodwin and Witham, for sponsoring this conversation. And of course, wanted to thank our amazing guest, Sneha. And we will see you all for Women's Health Tech Wednesday. Bye, everyone.